A dim ember crosses the inner sky, tagged as an interstellar visitor and draped in rumor. The phrase hidden structure spreads faster than the measurements that might judge it. Frames show a pale smear on a precise curve, nothing more. The useful question arrives quietly. If that supposed structure is only geometry and dust, what trace should appear when better data come back? Method supplies the first handholds. Brightness against phase angle does light swell simply because fine grains scatter forward at a favorable tilt. Spectral lines do water, carbon monoxide, or carbon dioxide whisper from a thin coma, or does the spectrum stay stubbornly blank? A light curve does a repeating flicker, reveal, spin, and shape rather than intent. Each test is a door that either opens or stays shut. Hype asks for certainty now. Physics asks for timing and replication. The frame tightens on the object, again, indifferent, fast, and eloquent only through numbers. Awe and fear both crowd the moment. But the story begins where instruments meet doubt. And doubt is handled as a tool, not an enemy. It enters the record with an interstellar signature, a path that will not close. The orbit is hyperbolic, energy unbound, velocity sufficient to ignore return. That alone makes it rare. Two earlier visitors set the cautionary tone novel, yes, but answered by patient measurement rather than spectacle. This newcomer inherits the same restraint, swift, indifferent, and statistically harmless as it threads the inner sky on a one-way course. Classification starts with geometry and continues with light. Apparent brightness negotiates with distance and angle. The inverse square law taxes every photon, while phase angle can lend a quiet boost. Fine grains scatter sunlight forward, making a faint body swell when the geometry favors the viewer. As elongation shrinks, solar glare lifts the background and the clean window narrows. The sky is never neutral. Moonlight raises noise. Air mass reddens. Seeing smears the point spread. Observers counter with method. Wide-field surveys patrol the corridor and hand off coordinates to larger mirrors. Multi-band photometry sketches color and grain size, looking for a gentle reddening slope rather than a flat metallic sheen. Low resolution, spectra hunt, modest lines, water, carbon monoxide, carbon dioxide, accepting that signal to noise, will live at the edge. When the target sinks toward the sun, stacking becomes a craft. Align on motion, reject cosmic rays, guard against over-subtraction that carves away the thing being measured. Timing disciplines the effort. Conjunction steals nights. Geometry returns them. A thin arc of favorable dates often decides whether a suspected feature survives scrutiny. Professional facilities coordinate across longitudes. Skilled amateurs extend cadence between weather gaps, carrying calibration with care. With each exposure, the light curve gathers, a heartbeat, small rises, small falls, a hint of spin that can impersonate structure if read too quickly. Replication across bands and instruments breaks that disguise. Within this procedural frame, the phrase hidden structure finds proportion. If anything architectural truly rides inside the glow, it will persist across nights, wavelengths, apertures, and processing choices. If it is dust, angle, or method masquerading as design, repetition will strip it away. The difference will not arrive as a shout. It will emerge cumulatively numbers that rhyme, plots that agree, and a rumor that either hardens into evidence or dissolves into practice. The spark was cultural, not instrumental. A few stretched frames appeared to show a hard edge inside the glow, and a catchy phrase, hidden structure, leapt from captions into commentary. Mood outran measurement. That is the cue for method to take the floor and convert rumor into questions that data can answer. The first objective is photometric. If the brightening is only geometry, it will follow a phase function that dust routinely obeys. Observers spread measurements across angles, correct for distance, and fit simple scattering laws. A rise that tracks angle is ordinary physics. A rise that ignores geometry, asks for an extra term, and earns further tests. The second objective is spectroscopic. Weak lines from water, carbon monoxide, or carbon dioxide would indicate outgassing even at modest levels. Narrowband filters and low-resolution spectra work at the edge of signal to noise, but non-detection still constrain production. Upper limits are not shrugs, they are ceilings that squeeze speculation into numbers. The third objective is morphological. Dust tails align with the antisolar vector and evolve predictably with grain size. A feature that rotates with the body or appears only under a particular stacking recipe points to processing artifacts or shape effects rather than architecture. Replication across nights, apertures, and seeing conditions is the referee. The fourth objective is rotational. A repeating light curve yields spin period, elongation, and possible tumbling. Analysts search for harmonics, test alias periods imposed by cadence, and compare brightness with color to separate facets from noise. Claims of specular glints must recur on schedule. One flash is anecdote, repetition is physics. The fifth objective is dynamical. Precise astrometry can reveal tiny non-gravitational accelerations. Radiation pressure scales with area to mass. Jets push along the line of outflow. Both leave signatures in orbit residuals. Fits with and without small accelerations are compared to see whether the numbers actually improve. The sixth objective is polarimetric. Linear polarization as a function of phase angle, fingerprints, particle size, and surface texture. Dust-rich Comet trace a familiar curve that rises and then bends. A smooth engineered surface would write a different story. Agreement with the dust curve does not prove composition, but it narrows the space for the extraordinary. There is also a communication objective. Results must separate what is measured, what is inferred, and what is imagined. Thresholds are declared before data arrive. Plots carry uncertainties, and no results are posted with the same care as hints. The claim is dramatic. The tools are standard. Progress will come from cadence, replication, and patience, rather than from a single image that flatters the eye. They start with the most obedient witness, light. Short, even exposures assemble a curve of brightness against time, distance, and phase angle. Scatter is honest. The sky adds its tax without debate. When the measurements are folded by angle and corrected for range, a modest rise appears where dust would predict it forward, scattering lending a quiet boost. A simple phase law fits most points. What remains after subtraction is small, irregular, and not yet a thesis. The first tile in the anomaly stack is labeled routine. A whisper lives in the residuals. A few points sit high on two nights that shared geometry and weather. Instinct circles them. Method interrogates them. Frames are re-registered on the object's motion. Backgrounds rebuilt with wider and then narrower windows. Cosmic rays remasked by hand. Each pass draws the outliers closer to the model. The lesson is procedural rather than dramatic. An anomaly that shrinks under stricter handling is calibration learning to stand. Spectra take their turn. The apparatus is modest by design, low resolution, careful slit placement, and a conservative sky subtraction. The question is binary. Do faint lines rise where water, carbon monoxide, or carbon dioxide should appear? The answer is a non-detection paired with limits tight enough to matter. Those ceilings translate into production rates that are low or absent, perfectly compatible with a dust-dominated coma. The stack gains a tile labeled constraint. Not surprise. Images are pushed for morphology. Long exposures are stacked two ways. Once on stars to display the object as a streak, and once on the target to freeze it. In one recipe, a thin extension appears roughly along the antisolar line. In another, where rejection thresholds are tuned differently, the extension weakens. Dust physics does not obey software settings. Artifacts often do. A check on a separate night under steadier seeing finds the feature ambiguous again. The flag stays yellow, candidate only if it repeats across instruments and nights. Rotation threads into the story. Within a single night, a gentle modulation tempts an interpretation, yet cadence and noise keep it shy of proof. Over several nights, the modulation returns within uncertainty, hinting at a period consistent with a mildly elongated body. Rotation is a mimic that can sculpt apparent edges when the signal is thin. Analysts search for harmonics, test aliases forced by observing schedules, and compare brightness changes with color changes to isolate facets from noise. The simplest fit survives a single period, small amplitude, no evident tumbling. If anything structural exists, it is not broadcasting through spin. Polarimetry, the quiet discriminator, adds its curve. Measurements across growing phase angles rise and then bend in the familiar way small grains prefer. Uncertainties remain generous, but the trend holds its posture. No abrupt departure hints at a smooth engineered surface. The stack absorbs this layer with a plain caption. Agreement with dust does not prove composition, yet it narrows the landscape that the extraordinary would need to occupy. Astrometry tightens the orbit. Positions are pinned to dense catalogs. Colored terms modeled. Optical distortions tamed. Solutions are fit with and without tiny non-gravitational terms. Radiation pressure at a plausible area to mass ratio fails to demand special pleading. Outgassing is already bounded by spectroscopy. Residuals sit where well-behaved numbers prefer to live quiet and small. Dynamics does not beckon invention. It requests a longer baseline. Back at the pixel level, the team revisits the frame that birthed a rumor of an inner edge. 3 transfer functions tell 3 versions of the same scene. Under gentle stretching, the edge relaxes into gradients. Under aggressive stretching, a rim returns, along with faint seams around bright field stars. The fingerprint resembles processing rather than physics. A second data set, taken under steadier air with a sharper point spread, refuses to show any inner rim at all. The stack demotes the claim to artifact until proven otherwise. Even so, the investigators leave room for geometry to help or to betray. Real features can sulk near thresholds and emerge only when angles cooperate. A run is scheduled to chase a useful swing in phase within a single night. If forward scattering drives the apparent swelling, the curve should respond coherently to that swing. The night is kind. Brightness bends with angle and distance, as dust would choreograph. The simple model earns another check mark. Broadband colors arrive from coordinated fields. The slope tilts mildly red, consistent with small, weathered grains and with faded surfaces that have forgotten heat. No flat, metallic patch interrupts the trend. Were reflective plates hiding within the glow, they would compete with dust and flatten the color. They do not. Color, polarization, and phase now rhyme across independent measurements, each modest alone, persuasive together. A checklist meeting condenses a sequence onto one page. For each alleged anomaly surges in brightness, an inner edge, a misaligned filament, the page lists tests completed and tests queued. Most items read repeat with independent instrument. Repeat under steadier seeing, repeat across bands. One line says pursue high cadence light curve to trap or exclude specular glints under the period hypothesis. Another says push polarimetry to higher angles if geometry allows. Nothing on the sheet requires reinvention. Everything requires discipline. Silence takes its scheduled shift as elongation worsens. In the pause, analysts run synthetic injections. They seed fake edges, thin filaments, and brief glints into raw frames, then drive the pipeline to see what the machinery will hallucinate or miss. The exercise is not theater. It measures fragility and teaches humility, showing how easily familiar artifacts can masquerade as structure when star trails, cosmic rays, and flat field scars conspire. When geometry returns, priority falls on replication. Same claim, new nights, new optics. A thin filament that persists under that regime graduates from rumor to candidate. A vanishing feature is a story told by software. The rule is short enough to memorize and difficult enough to fill careers. Extraordinary claims are allergic to repetition or they survive it. There is no third option. By the end of this sequence, the anomaly stack looks less like a tower and more like a ledger. Rows carry methods, columns carry nights, entries repeat with comforting indifference. The portrait is not theatrical. It is coherent. A faint interstellar passerby behaves as a faint interstellar passerby should. Dust and geometry explain more than they conceal. What remains is not a metallic edge shouting for attention, but a handful of narrow questions, each paired with a concrete test in the next observing window. Elongation contracts and glare rises until the corridor closes. The human reflex is to stitch the gap with story. The investigation declines the offer. In this field, absence is scheduled and mechanical. When the target runs too near the sun's direction, background climbs, contrast falls, and precision thins. The pause is geometry, not intrigue, and it is as measurable as any exposure taken on a clear night. Silence is written into the ledger with dates, angles, and limits. Schedules mark when the object is unobservable from given latitudes, when moonlight will inflate noise, and when high air mass will bend color terms. Pipelines are version-locked, calibration frames are banked so the before and after can be compared without drift. The standing question changes shape. Not what happened off stage, but what remains possible given that no new photons arrived. Work continues where new skies are not required. Teams inject synthetic features into raw frames, thin rims, faint filaments, single frame glints, and push them through the reduction chain to measure fragility. Upper limits from earlier spectra are propagated forward to bound any dormant jets. Orbit fits are extended to test where tiny non-gravitational terms would matter if they exist. Even in quiet, hypotheses are thinned because bookkeeping has teeth. Communication adopts the same discipline. Updates state plainly that the window is closed and why. They publish the next recoverable dates, the phase angle span expected, and the first measurements that will matter. Resume multiband photometry, deeper low-resolution spectra, a polarimetric sweep if geometry permits, and a tighter light curve to challenge any talk of glints. The tone is procedural rather than suspenseful. Then the sky turns. The object slides back into darker air, and the instruments open their shutters. The interval has done its work, cooling rumor, preserving calibration, and converting impatience into testable predictions. New frames do not land in a vacuum. They land beside thresholds declared in advance, where silence has narrowed the map, so that the next answers, whatever they are, must walk a shorter road. The ledger points first to a quiet, workmanlike answer. Photometry follows a phase law familiar from dusty Comet. Color indices tilt mildly red, polarization rises and rolls over along the curve small grains prefer. Spectroscopy returns limits rather than lines, yet those ceilings are low enough to shape expectation. Taken together, the measurements do not demand reinvention. The visitor behaves like a faint interstellar body whose brightness is steered by distance, angle, and fine dust. Doing predictable work, a second path remains open, but conditional. Any inner rim, filament, or edge that persists across instruments, nights, and bands would graduate from artifact to phenomenon. The present stack refuses that promotion. Candidate features weaken under alternative reductions, fail to repeat on schedule, or dissolve when seeing steadies. They stay in the file marked interesting until they earn the harder word, and the harder word is evidence. The interim synthesis chooses practicality over drama. Within the space of what is measured, a natural explanation covers more terrain than it leaves blank. Forward scattering accounts for the apparent swelling. Modest or undetected gas release keeps spectra quiet. A gently elongated, slowly rotating shape explains the light curve's small modulation. What remains is a to-do list rather than a barricade. Extend polarization to higher phase angles if geometry allows, run high-cadence photometry to trap or exclude glints, and push deeper limits on common volatiles. There is also a ledger for cost, and it counts human habits. Overstatement spends tomorrow's credibility to buy today's attention. When extraordinary language outruns ordinary data, later corrections feel like retreat, even when they are simply progress. The public, who fund the mirrors and the pipelines, deserve the steadier rhythm of constraint and replication. That rhythm is slower than rumor, but faster than rebuilding trust after spectacle collapses. Caution, too, carries a price worth naming. Excessive conservatism can blunt curiosity, trim risky observations, and leave narrow windows only partly used. The remedy is not theater. It is design, draft tests that would corner the extraordinary if it exists. Publish nulls with the same care as signals. State in plain words what observation would change the mind, and keep that space open without stuffing it with noise. Communication belongs inside the method, not as decoration after the fact. A clear provisional resolution declares that natural explanations lead on points while keeping room for revision if stubborn features survive repetition. It lists next measurements in the same breath as conclusions and spells out the consequences of each branch. If gas lines appear, energy budgets will be rebuilt. If polarization departs from the dust curve, particle models will be refit. If nothing unusual persists, the ordinary will have earned its name by passing more difficult tests. The phase closes with disciplined readiness. Numbers rhyme across methods. Predictions are posted where they can be falsified by the next window. Awe survives without help from dread. The working hypothesis is natural. The working posture is humble. Either the extraordinary will withstand repetition, or the ordinary will grow stronger for having been asked again. In both outcomes, knowledge advances, which is the only victory that matters here. Geometry loosens its grip, and the corridor opens. Elongation improves. Phase angle climbs, and the target steps back into darker air. The plan is quiet and exacting. Observers stage a sweep across several phase angles in quick succession, asking a simple question first: does brightness bend with angle as forward scattering predicts, or does it resist that bend in a way dust should not? Priorities line up as tests rather than promises. Multi-band photometry repeats the color slope and watches for any flattening that reflective plates would imprint. Low-resolution spectra dig deeper, accepting long integrations to tighten limits on water, carbon monoxide, and carbon dioxide. High cadence photometry hunts for periodic flashes that would betray facets or glints. If any appear, they must recur on schedule. Polarimetry traces the rise and rollover that dust prefers, while astrometry extends the time base to expose any subtle non-gravitational push that earlier fits could not see. Coordination multiplies what any single telescope can do. Professional facilities share cadence, calibration, stars, and reduction notes. Skilled amateurs braid the gaps between longitudes and weather, carrying careful flats and darks like passports. Pipelines are version locked. Thresholds are declared before the first night, so plots cannot be bent by hindsight. Null results are posted beside hints, with uncertainties attached in plain view. The reflection that closes the plan is sober and useful. The phrase that frightened headlines was never a measurement. It was a mood stapled to a few frames. The ledger assembled so far does not mock the mood. It measures it. Ordinary physics explains more than it conceals, and what remains unresolved has names, units, and a schedule. The unknown is not an abyss. It is a list written in dates and angles. Awe can live inside that discipline. An interstellar passerby is rare enough to justify patience, precise enough to reward it, and swift enough to demand it. The next window does not choose between wonder and caution. It uses both. Either a stubborn feature survives repetition and earns a new chapter, or the ordinary strengthens its claim by passing harder tests. In either case, knowledge moves forward, which is the point of watching at all.